I grew up in a small town in West Virginia, not far from the small college I attended. In 2021, my freshman year, the pandemic was still changing everything, especially campus life. Most students avoided the dorms and rented apartments nearby, but I couldn't afford that. I stayed on campus and drove home on weekends. On day one, I met my roommate. We had texted a bit after the school gave her my number, which felt strange. She seemed polite at first, but in person, she gave off this distant, privileged vibe. At one point, she even told me, "Everyone basically has their own rooms now." I did last semester, until you came. I didn't know how to respond, so I let it go. She spent most weekdays with her boyfriend, barely around, and that's when things started to get creepy. That first Friday, I packed my bag and headed home for the weekend, just like I had planned. By Monday morning at 6, I was back in the dorm, still half asleep, but glad I had time before my first class at 10. I tossed my stuff down and went straight to bed, sinking into the thick memory foam mattress. After about 10 minutes, just as I was drifting off, I felt the edge of the mattress slowly dip, like someone was leaning down right beside me. My body froze. I lay there wide awake now, trying to tell myself it was nothing. A minute later, the weight lifted and the bed rose back up. My heart pounded as the thought hit me. Someone had leaned on my bed. Slowly, I turned my head and saw her, my roommate, lying with her back to me, facing the wall, motionless. She looked like she was asleep. I shut my eyes tight, pretending I hadn't felt anything, hoping it was all in my head. The next weekend played out the same. I left Friday, came back early Monday, dropped my bag, and crawled into bed craving a few more hours of sleep before class. But this time, something felt different. Moments after lying down, the mattress didn't just dip at the edge. It sagged deep on one whole side, heavy like someone had sat right next to me. My heart started racing. I froze, staring into the dark, not daring to move. Then, I felt the weight shift and heard the sound of someone climbing down. My bed was high enough that I needed a step stool to get on it, and I clearly heard feet hit the floor. I held my breath, waited, then slowly turned my head. My roommate was on her bed again, back to me, still as stone. 100 thoughts ran through my mind. Was I losing it from lack of sleep, dreaming, or was someone actually in our room? It felt impossible. Only we had the keys. Yet the feeling had been so real. I tried to convince myself I was just exhausted and closed my eyes, hoping sleep would make it all disappear. When Monday came, I was already tense. Walking in, I saw her on her bed, this time facing mine, eyes closed like she was asleep. I climbed onto my bed, trying to calm myself, but 5 minutes later, the mattress dipped again, slow and heavy. I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling someone sit right next to me. Then, a cold hand pressed gently against the back of my neck. My heart crashed in my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. They didn't squeeze, just stayed there, holding me like they owned the moment. What felt like hours later, the weight lifted, footsteps moved away. I stayed frozen, then finally turned. She was still lying there, back to me, and I didn't care if she was asleep or not. I was terrified. I left the room right away and called my mom, too shaken to even think about going to class. Through tears, I told her everything, and she immediately reported it to the school. Thank God they let me switch rooms. They even asked if I wanted to involve the police, but I said no. There was no proof she had done anything. I just begged them not to assign her another roommate. As I unpacked in my new room, pieces of memory came back. She once mentioned having another roommate who didn't stay long, but she never explained why. I also remembered the day she unlocked a drawer filled with at least 10 bottles of prescription pills. She claimed it was for a skin issue, but something about it felt off. Maybe it was true, or maybe she was hiding something darker. A few days later, I remembered I had left a book and a binder in her room. Honestly, I didn't care much about the book. But then she messaged me, telling me to come pick it up. I didn't want to, but I also didn't want to raise suspicion, so I agreed. My key still worked, so I let myself in. She wasn't there, and I felt a wave of relief as I grabbed my things. But as I turned toward the door, there she was, standing in the doorway, silent. I hadn't even heard the lock. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile and tried to play it cool. She stared at me for a moment before finally asking, "Where's your new room?" I froze, then quickly answered that it was on the first floor. She pressed again, asking which hall, which side, what it was near, the office, the front, the stairs. I lied, saying it was by the stairs, my voice shaking. I slipped past her, refusing to look back, and left as quickly as I could. That was the last time I ever saw her. For a long time, I thought about warning her boyfriend, but the truth is, I was too scared to ever bring it up. I still think about it, even now. Was it a dream, some strange hallucination from stress and no sleep? Deep down, I don't believe that. No one else had a key. Maybe she was sleepwalking because of her medication, or maybe something darker was happening. My mom believes she was testing how close she could get to me before I woke up, and that one morning she might have actually tried to choke me. I'll never know the truth. It's behind me now, but the thought still chills me. I just hope no one else ever had to share a room with her again. This happened back when I was in university during my final year. I studied at the University of Huddersfield from 2021 to 2023. It's not really a place known for nightlife, so most students who stayed late usually ended up on campus, especially in the library or one of the academic buildings that stayed open 24/7. I was never the type to stay out late myself, but for this project, I had no choice. I was taking an advanced statistics class, and the professor was famous for piling on massive assignments. One of the biggest deadlines was coming up, and I was way behind. My laptop had been acting up, so I decided to use the computers in the business building. That place always felt strange. 3 floors, kind of old, and at night it carried this heavy, sterile silence that made the air feel colder. Still, the second-floor computer lab was usually empty after 9, and I thought it would be the perfect spot to finally catch up. That night I walked in around 10 p.m., swiped my ID, and the door beeped open. The sharp smell of cleaning chemicals hit me, which told me the staff had already finished for the night. I headed straight for the lab, powered up a computer, and got into my work. The steady tapping of the keyboard was almost comforting. I kept glancing at the clock in the corner of the screen, promising myself I'd leave before 1 a.m. But around 11:30, something happened that made me regret ever staying there. I was lost in my data when a door slammed somewhere deep inside the building. Not the front entrance. This came from farther down the hall. At first I tried to shrug it off, maybe the air system or a janitor finishing up. But then I remembered the janitors were long gone. The silence pressed in and I forced myself to keep typing. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy steps echoing from the hallway outside the lab. They weren't faint or hurried. They were steady, almost deliberate, like someone wanted me to hear them. My fingers stopped on the keyboard. I stared at the glowing screen, holding my breath, hoping whoever it was would just walk by and disappear into the dark. But the footsteps didn't fade away. They stopped right outside the lab door. My stomach dropped. If I leaned back, I could see through the little window, but I couldn't bring myself to look. I sat frozen, holding my breath, counting the seconds. Then, the handle rattled. Not soft, not curious. Hard, deliberate. Like someone trying to break in or scare me on purpose. My heart slammed against my ribs. I knew the doors locked automatically at night. There was no way anyone should be able to get in. But the sound of that handle jerking again and again made me feel sick. It went on for what felt like forever, then finally stopped. Silence hung heavy before slow, heavy footsteps started up again, fading down the hall until there was nothing but the hum of the computers and the sound of my own breathing. I sat frozen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, debating if I should just pack up and run. My project was due the next morning, though, and I kept telling myself it had to be another student messing around. I forced a shaky breath and started typing again, trying to focus. Not even 10 minutes passed before the sound returned. Footsteps. Only this time, they weren't in the hallway. They were above me. The ceiling had those thin drop panels, and at night you could sometimes hear pipes creak when the heat kicked on. But this wasn't pipes. This was slow, uneven, deliberate movement. The unmistakable sound of someone crawling or dragging themselves across the tiles directly above my head. My skin went cold as the noise scraped closer, like it was following me from above. I sat frozen, staring at the ceiling, terrified of what I might see. One of the panels shifted, not much, just enough to show that something heavy was pressing down on it. A slow creak followed, the sound of weight lowering carefully, like someone was trying to be quiet while climbing down. My chest tightened. That was it for me. I yanked my flash drive from the computer, shoved my notebook into my backpack, and bolted for the door. The moment I stepped into the hallway, it felt like a different world. The long corridor glowed under buzzing fluorescent lights, half of them flickering, making shadows crawl across the walls. All I could hear was the squeak of my sneakers on the tile as I sped toward the stairwell. I pushed the heavy door open, heart pounding, and started running down the steps, convinced that whatever was in the ceiling was now following close behind. That's when I made the mistake of looking up. On the landing, one floor above me stood a man. He wasn't a student, and he definitely wasn't a professor. His clothes were loose, torn in places, like he had no reason to be there. His face was half hidden in shadow, but I could see his mouth hanging open, stretched into this unnatural wide grin. He didn't move, not a single step. He just stared down at me, like he'd been waiting. Panic surged through me. I bolted, flying down the stairs so fast, I almost lost my footing. I shoved through the first floor door and sprinted toward the front entrance. My ID card beeped just in time for the lock to click, and I burst outside, running across campus without daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached my dorm, slammed the door shut, locked it, and collapsed against it, gasping for air with my heart still racing. The next morning, I forced myself back to the business building only because I had to turn in my project. In daylight, it looked like a completely different place, quiet and harmless. But the second I stepped into the lab, my stomach dropped. One of the ceiling tiles was missing, the same tile directly above where I'd been working, and another from the corner, the one I had seen shift the night before. It hit me all at once. Someone had been up there, watching me work, rattling the door handle to mess with me on purpose. When they realized the door was locked, they had climbed back into the ceiling to get out. My hands shook as I imagined what his plan was, if he'd managed to get into the room before I ran. After that night, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ever stepping back into that building after dark again. Whatever I heard, whatever I saw, it wasn't just my imagination, and I don't want to find out how far it could have gone if I stayed. I think it's safe to say I'll be saving up for a new laptop and finishing every project from the comfort of my own dorm, even if it means losing sleep. At least there, I know what's around me, and who isn't watching from the ceiling. My name's Annabelle. I'm 20 now and from the UK. But this happened years ago when I was still in high school. I was 16 at the time, and to this day I swear it was the scariest moment of my life. It might sound dramatic, but you'll understand soon enough. For some context, my school had these ID lanyards that every student had to wear. Anyone could walk into the front foyer of the building, but you couldn't get past the main doors without scanning your ID on a screen. The card had your name and photo, though most kids flipped them around so no one could really see. The school itself was fairly new, split into 3 sections: a nursery, a special school for kids with learning disabilities, and then our high school. On the very first day, teachers warned us to never let anyone inside if we didn't know them. The day this happened was my second full day there. I'd been sick the week before, and on this day, I had geography all day long. About 20 minutes after lunch, the juice I chugged in the cafeteria finally caught up with me. I asked to use the bathroom, which teachers usually hated, but mine could tell I wasn't faking it. That detail matters, because during class hours, the hallways were always empty. No teachers, no students. So when I walked alone through the cafeteria toward the bathroom and came back the same way, I should have been completely alone. When I pushed back through the doors into the empty cafeteria, I froze. There was a man sitting alone at one of the tables. At first, I didn't think much of it. People weren't usually walking around during class hours, but sometimes they did. I figured maybe he was a teacher on break or even a parent visiting. I kept walking, trying not to make it awkward, when suddenly he said, "Hey!" The sound made me jump so hard, I let out a little squeal. I get startled easily, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment. He laughed and quickly added, "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you." I forced a smile, and that's when I noticed something that made me relax a little. Around his neck was a lanyard, the same kind all teachers wore. So in that moment, I convinced myself he must have been staff. But something about him still felt off. Looking back now, the detail that chills me the most was his lanyard. Sure, he wore one, but the ID part was flipped backwards so you couldn't see his face or name. Students did that all the time, but for a teacher, it didn't make sense. At that moment, though, I didn't think twice. I was still embarrassed about squealing earlier and just wanted to seem polite. Then he looked at me and said, "I need some help getting some work things out of my car. Do you mind coming out with me for just a second?" Without hesitation, I answered, "Yeah, of course," because in my head he was still just a staff member. It never crossed my mind how strange it was for a teacher to ask a 16-year-old girl to help them outside during class hours when the halls were empty. We left the cafeteria in silence, walked through the foyer, and stepped outside. Right away, I noticed something that didn't sit right. Usually, teachers make small talk when you're walking with them, asking about your classes or just filling the quiet. But he said nothing. He just walked ahead, his shoulders tight and his hands restless. First shoved deep into his pockets, then pulled out, then clasped together like he didn't know what to do with them. It struck me as strange, but I brushed it off, too shy to break the silence myself. I just followed a few steps behind, my nerves buzzing. The layout of the front of the school didn't help either. From the entrance to the car park was about 50 meters, long enough to feel exposed, and the lot itself was hidden by tall bushes until you were standing right in front of it. What unsettled me most was the thought that if you kept walking straight past those bushes without turning into the car park, you'd step right off school property altogether. We walked in silence until he suddenly said, "Yeah, my work stuff is in the boot. That's what we call the trunk in the UK. I've got a few bags. Just need you to help me carry some back inside." I nodded without thinking. When we reached the car park, he pointed toward a blue car at the very end. My stomach tightened as we got closer. Through the window, I spotted movement, like a shadow shifting in the back seat. My pace slowed, and then it hit me. There weren't bags back there. There were at least 2 men crouched low, waiting. I froze, my mind blank, and that split second of hesitation gave me away. They must have realized I saw them because the back door of the car suddenly swung open. One man scrambled out, and before I could react, the man I thought was a teacher clamped his hand around my arm as I spun to run. He was tall and broad, towering over me, and for context, I'm barely 5'2" and underweight. By all logic, I shouldn't have stood a chance. But in that moment, adrenaline took over. I yanked my arm back with every ounce of strength I had, ripped free of his grip, and bolted toward the school. Behind me, I heard the pounding of multiple heavy footsteps closing in, echoing off the pavement, and for a moment I was sure they'd catch me. But just as quickly, the sound stopped. My school's front entrance had wide glass automatic doors that took a second to slide open, and if they had chased me all the way, they would have caught me there. I can only guess they stopped, because those glass doors faced the street, and someone might have walked by. Maybe they didn't want to be seen. Either way, it was the only thing that saved me. I burst into the foyer and sprinted straight into the cafe connected to the library. Shaking and out of breath, I rushed to the woman working there and spilled everything. She calmed me down, then walked me to a teacher's office where they called my parents and the police. Security cameras in the parking lot caught everything, and the men were later charged with attempted kidnapping. What chilled me even more was learning how he got in. He'd found a student's dropped lanyard outside, and that was why his ID was flipped. I didn't set foot back in school for weeks after that, and even now I'm still in therapy trying to work through what happened. Putting it into words and sharing it feels like the only way I can really process it. No matter how much time passes, this will always remain the single scariest experience of my life, and I hope no one else ever has to go through something like it.